Hello and welcome back to Earthbeat Visions, a history of the future sound of London. This week we are starting 2009 with the first video in quite a while that features no releases at all, just transmissions and live performances. Starting with the future sound of London, Electric Brainstorms Volume 4, The Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water, The Pod Room, 2nd of January 2009.
I am the spirit of dark and lonely water.
Donald Pleasance narrates the legendary 1973 public information film about water safety, The Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water, to start this fourth Electric Brainstorm. The mix was due for release on the first day of 2009, but eventually came out a day late in the early hours of 2nd of January. By FSOL standards, that's almost early. It's notable for a couple of reasons. It's the first FSOL mix to be made specifically for the Pod Room, and it's the first Electric Brainstorm to have a subtitle. It's also the first to feel like a collection of tracks that are truly designed to be together. The first 3, or 4 if you count 0.5, EBS shows are excellent, but this is where the series gets a proper identity of its own. The Lonely Water samples are used several times throughout the mix, and the musical content follows a similar theme. Water samples, a hooting owl, often very dark, haunting sounding music. Malcolm Clarke's synth piece behind the opening spoken sample, for example, highlights the threat in the words, and Roger Eno's Evening Tango is chilling. The bleak drone of the following Noi track and the hypnotic Section 25 piece do nothing to lighten the mood. Eventually, Richard Pinhas brightens things a little with the warmer but wistfully nostalgic Ruiter, a blend of classic analogue synths and guitar arpeggios. This fades into a field recording of the English countryside, a ghostly steam train whistle cutting through, then more dark synth music from White Noise. The hints of hauntology in past EBS mixes have taken over here. The overall mood is one of a 1970s horror story, a snippet of some atmospheric ECM style jazz, and Eno's nostalgic Becalmed follow. At 21 minutes comes the first track to be made within 20 years of the mix, Mez by Murkoff. The micro-glitches of Murkoff's music are the first sign of digital music in EBS4, although the brooding atmosphere of his music is perfectly in line with everything played so far. The frippatronics added over the outro are a wonderful touch. Mez is one of only 10 post-80s tracks on the transmission, other than those on FSOL Digital, making it somewhat akin to an electronic Monstrous psychedelic bubble. At this time, this fed into the expectation of the second FSOL curated volume of the MPB CD series. After some atmospheric jazz from Jack DeJohnette's special edition is a further hooting owl for the nocturnal atmosphere, before the suitably named Ghost plays spectral acoustic improvisation. Then it's back into a mixture of 70s synth music and 80s industrial, with a brief excursion to then current music with Stephen Harron's Seafar project, listed as Young Fleeto at this point, a track from an album to be released on FSOL Digital a few months later. Between the tracks are a couple of bizarre environments with slowed down voices and scraping metal at one point, a melange of helicopters elsewhere, and even a chilly wind blowing waste material around. The bulk of the rest of the first part continues with European electronics from the 70s and 80s, with a brief diversion to the experimental techno of Ellen Allien and the lo-fi sounds of Will Sargent. After the difficult to navigate length of the second Electric Brainstorm, this fourth volume is handily cut into 2, making it suitable for burning to CDR or playing in 2 manageable blocks. There's no actual gap between the 2 sections, however, meaning Part 2 continues direct with Cluster's classic So Vi So So. A brief use of the 96-97 tour sample I'm Here over the top is the first hint of earlier FSOL in the mix.
What we're witnessing, of course, is the death of permanence. A new society is being created around us, built from the broken pieces of today. And those who people that society are going to live in a very different world.
A sample from the 1972 Orson Welles film Future Shock is followed by a still unidentified lo-fi piano piece. It's beautiful, hauntingly nostalgic with an eerie reverb, and fits brilliantly within the framework of the mix. Next is a still unreleased Z-Box track, Crosswind, with lots of odd chittering and rumbling sounds over which hard to discern vocal samples and familiar field recordings are played. After a track from The Residents is the first FSOL of the mix, an excerpt from Sunken Ships, at the time a track in its own right called Viewed from the Right. The appearance of the Viewed From format, after Environments 2's Viewed From Above, as well as the stylistic similarity with it being string-based, hinted at it being potential Environments 3 material, as well as the possibility of the album continuing in and even expanding on the modern classical vein of the second volume. A couple of Brian's early 80s influences, Cabaret Voltaire and 23 Skidoo, continue the mix in dark atmospheric territory before the inevitable Ghost Box track from Eric Zahn. A track by the ultra-obscure Department Noise X Terror follows. Try finding anything other than vague references online, followed by some experimental gong music from the 70s by forward-thinking composer Silvio Gualda. Then it's time for exclusive track number 2, The Oldest Lady, described by myself at the time as sounding unlike anything they've previously worked on, except perhaps the Wicker Doll. Its modern classical approach suggested it might be on the mythical new album. This version features a vocal sample missing from the final studio mix, and remains my favourite version of the track. It's followed by more Max Richter from his 24 Postcards in Full Colour record, a piece of early tape music from Daphne Oram, and some more modern classical work, this time from Richard Skelton's A Broken Consort project. This is followed in the tracklist by CR/CR-CR, which doesn't appear to be on the mix at all, there's always one. The very 70s sounding Kling Klang are next, followed by an excerpt from an interview that accompanied the band's 1994 Mixing It transmission, a soul backwards looking moment in an otherwise very new sounding mix, despite the older material. Then it's the third new FSOL track of the set, the still unreleased Boundaries, itself preceded by more owl hoots, steam trains and tinkling stream. It's a fairly dark sounding down-tempo ambient piece, completely at home on this mix. I'd love to get a full version on an album one day, although the FSOL sound has moved on dramatically in the 16 years since. A piece from the second Monsterism Highland compilation and a snippet of Stockhausen bring the mix to a close, ending on a field recording of some angry shouting sourced from freesound.org and some reversed brass band music. The tracklist was always one of the easier to work out due to a largely accurate one given in the downloads artwork, typically with a few errors just to keep us on our feet. The art itself is a perfect match for the music, Brian's pinhole photography blending pictures of his church home with brutalist building blocks and a few shots of himself. The back cover's ghostly figure is perfect. The tonally consistent selection of tracks and ghostly atmosphere throughout the mix was exciting at the time, giving some idea of where the new FSOL album might head. Despite their sampling all kinds of older music, 90s FSOL records were always very much in the future category, charting spacey landscapes and dystopian cities, so the hauntological analogue synth sound presented on the EBS mixes hitting its peak on this show was a new and intriguing direction. Brian's new home in a Somerset forest at the convergence of 9 ley lines was seemingly turning his musical interests toward the shadowy corners of the British landscape. With a handful of new spoken samples over the top and almost no use of samples from 90s transmissions, some distinctly atmospheric environments between tracks, and the notably hauntological approach, to me this is the point where the FSOL digital era and sound properly kicks off. As with the bulk of the band's mixes, it was removed from the podroom with a later FSOL digital redesign, although it still can be heard on Mixcloud and YouTube. As always, tracklist in the comments. The Future Sound of London, Bloc Festival, 13th of March 2009. In late 2008, rumours of an FSOL world tour began to spread. What would this entail? Was the band going out on stage for the first time? An ISDN radio tour? Amorphous Androgynous shows mislabelled? It turned out to be a handful of ISDN transmissions to actual venues in the way the band had played the 1997 Essential Festival and how they'd expected to continue throughout that year before Gaz became uncomfortable with the idea and got cold feet. What could have been a more concrete sign that FSOL were very much back than this? The first show was headlining the first night of the 2009 Bloc Festival in Minehead, not far from Brian's home near Frome. Advertised as the band's first show in over 10 years, there was quite a lot of hype, and in true FSOL style a fair amount of miscommunication, with the festival forgetting or neglecting to mention that they would be playing via ISDN from Brian's studio. A couple of friends of mine attended, and agree with several YouTube commenters who were disappointed that the band weren't present. Of course, FSOL have never played on stage, but then many attending the festival were unlikely to be quite so well versed in the band's history. Their social media is still plagued by people asking, "When are you coming to our country?" The pre-festival press were at least clued up, with the performance described as returning to the high-concept audio-visual trip last witnessed at Brighton's Essential Festival in 1997. FSOL will play live in their studio, connected via ISDN to a monolithic video bank on stage. They get a live feed straight back from the audience, allowing them to monitor and adapt to the crowd's reaction for a true live performance. In an interview with Byte Bristol to promote the show, Gaz spoke more enthusiastically about FSOL than he had since 1996. We are revisiting our old headspace and reinvigorating it as the starting point and thus using it as a springboard to the new. We feel like we are starting afresh again now. These ISDN shows are a new beginning to develop a new language where music, film, installation and communication can trigger the emotions. We can already feel the ideas flowing and change will be rapid from here. In a year's time, who knows where it will be. We both feel this is an incredible time for us to revisit the FSOL headspace. Needless to say, fans were over the moon. After the show, Graham from Freedom sent over a set list. Mouth Muse, Cascade, Dead Cities, My Kingdom, Globular, Lifeforms, Hallucination, Brujo, Tingler 96, new untitled track, Proggy, We Have Explosive, Papua New Guinea. It's an interesting selection, opening with the archived Mouth Muse, not broadcast in the 90s, before moving into most of these singles, Brujo, another archive piece, and, strangely, Dead Cities. Of the two unreleased tracks, Proggy had previously appeared on a live music collection as Roid Rage, while new untitled track remains unreleased to this day. It's a fairly uplifting, quite bouncy IDM piece from videos. Speaking of videos, the graphics broadcast of the venue seem to be heavily based around the band's 90s music videos, along with footage of Brian and Gaz performing in the studio. A few weeks after the performance, a clip of the opening section was added to the official YouTube. Also plenty of fan recordings ended up on there. The set begins with the 1996 tour opening, after which Gaz greets the crowd. "Hello, is there anybody out there? Is there anybody in there? I'm here, I remember you." Sadly, there doesn't appear to be any footage of Lifeforms on YouTube, so we don't know whether it was the original or part of the re-recorded version. There are plenty of glowing remarks on YouTube too, and those who were maybe more in tune with what the band were trying to do seem to have loved the show. And certainly the audience reaction to Papua New Guinea and We Have Explosive in their 1997 style live format seems to be phenomenal. I really would have loved to be there just to be in the crowd at that moment. For a fan, it must have been an amazing show, and it kicked off a year of live performances by both FSOL and Amorphous that saw both bands having a bigger public presence than any time since 2002 and probably 1997. Gaz Cobain's A to Z of Psychedelia, BBC Radio 1, 23rd of March 2009. Riding off the success of the first Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble CD, Gaz was invited to BBC Radio 1 to spend 2 hours chatting to Rob de Bank about Psychedelia. Rob de Bank had of course got Amorphous down to play at Festival a couple of years before. That said, he continues to refer to him as Gaz from the future sound of London. As the first Radio 1 appearance in over 7 years, gives an idea of what a great press campaign can do for you. The show opens with chat about what psychedelia means and how it relates to both 1967 and 2009, with material from the Peppermint Tree getting some radio play at last in the background. Then the A to Z starts, and after a long list of psychedelic influences, as well as acid, it's Amorphous Androgynous for A. Edits of I Have Loved You Into Oblivion and Marylebone Road, the latter sounding a touch better than normal with a lot of radio compression on it. Bizarre that. After that, Gaz talks about only really having two aliases these days, Amorphous and FSOL, feeding into the general feeling that FSOL digital side projects are largely Brian's. Amorphous is about finding truth and happiness, FSOL is about enjoying the moments of unhappiness. Apparently. I'm sure Brian would agree with that. He then says FSOL has become timely again with the possibility of hooking up TV, film, radio, internet again, the recent Bloc performance being the start of this new era of FSOL broadcast system. Have I mentioned how exciting this was at the time? B is for Beatles. Tomorrow Never Knows is a track that links FSOL and Amorphous by featuring as far back as the 1995 FSOL Essential Mix. C is Comus and their wonderfully bonkers song Diana. There's a chat about the pagan sounds of the track, which leads to Gaz talking about ley lines and Christian churches built on them. I wonder if he's talking about Brian there. There's also a chat about the soul having predestined needs for things and government conspiracies, which may be a point certain more FSOL-leaning fans decided to turn off. D is for Donovan, and of course Barabba Jaggle is played. Gaz gushes about Donovan for quite a while after. E is for Ed Askew, and F is for Focus on their honking, squawking, elephantiasis flutes, with a track previously heard on Electric Brainstorms 2. G is for Grover Washington Jr. A bit of chat about it follows, but then Rob drags Gaz into talking about Papua New Guinea. H is for Hendrix, Jimmy. There are obviously no rules about whether the letter applies to the first or surname here. Gaz says it's important to never be a completist. Sorry Gaz, FSOL completist here. I is for Gunter Kalman Choir. Wait a minute, what? I is for I Monster, only as an excuse to play the track sampled in Daydream Blue instead. Cheat. J is for July, a track Gaz got from Brian, who might not wear the flares but appreciates them. The Way is a rare example of that first generation British psychedelia to still make it through the Amorphous gates at this point. K is for Czech jazz fusion keyboardist Martin Kratochvil, which was recommended by Andy Votel. L is for Leon Russell. M is for John McLaughlin, and fittingly Mahavishnu Orchestra, in this case with the Monstrous Bubble perennial You Know. There's a lot of discussion about the recently released Oasis remix, with some, probably intentionally, ridiculous chat about Noel and Gaz both being reincarnated around the same time. And so N is for Noel Gallagher, or indeed Noasis, with the Alicia Sufit fronted part 4 of the remix played. More on that remix in a minute. O is for Proto-Kraftwerk Group organisation, who Gaz seems to be far more fond of than the Autobahn and later incarnation, perhaps unsurprisingly. One imagines Brian is the opposite. P is for Psychonauts, that's Psychonauts, a modern group who apparently had just been in touch after discovering their appearance on the first Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble compilation. Q is for Quo Status, more cheating again there. Apparently the first song Gaz's first teenage band played was a cover of the Quo's debut hit Pictures of Matchstick Men. That really amuses me, and of course that's one of their 2 psychedelic albums. R is for the Rolling Stones, with another track that dates right back to the very start of the Monstrous Bubble series in 1997. In context of S, Gaz talks about sitars, and FSOL fans disliking the amount the instrument gets used in Amorphous tracks. It's always fun to hear him addressing fans, especially as it rarely happens. I wonder how much he's read the FSOL list and FSOL board over the years. S turns out to be for Sunforest. T is for Tommy Janes and the Shondells. I've lost the plot, Gaz states when talking about archiving Psychedelia and discussing the track. U is for US 69, with another track that dates back to the early Monstrous Bubble mixes. V is for Vangelis. Don't worry, it's one of his early songs, no ambient music here obviously. W is for The White Noise. Love With That Sound is described as the song that started the turning point towards Amorphous in 1997. X is for X Factor, which leads to Ananda Shankar's explorations somehow. Apparently it's all Simon Cowell's fault. He also mentioned Ecstasy, who really should have been played instead, especially one of their Dukes of Stratosphere tracks. Go on Gaz, surprise us. Y is for Yellow Moon Band, and Z is for Zepp, Led Zeppelin. The final tracks come in thick and fast, with very little in the way of interview, Gaz having talked so much in the first half that the end of the live broadcast looms heavily. The show was recorded from BBC's iPlayer, and that bootleg does the rounds. Almost everything here is on one Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble CD or another, meaning it's mostly the interviews you'll be coming here for if you want to give it a listen. And so to 2009 remixes, the year the Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble remix was born. The very first Amorphous Androgynous remix, and the first collaboration with Noel Gallagher. It's only one remix, but it's a career-changing one. Oasis, Falling Down, a Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble mix. The story about Noel Gallagher's brief love affair with the music of the Amorphous Androgynous is pretty well documented. After his discovery of the first Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble CD compilation, and subsequently naming it one of his favourite albums ever, he got in touch with Amorphous to ask them to remix the next Oasis single. Say what you want about Noel, but he tells a good tale, and I love this one from Mojo in 2011. I call up Gaz Cobain, who I've never met or had any contact with, so there's no way he could know I was calling. Is that Gaz? And he imitates a whispery, mysterious voice. Yes? It's Noel Gallagher. Ah, I was expecting you. And I'm going, really? He says, yes, I've been watching you. Amusingly, Gaz tells pretty much the same story in his A to Z of Psychedelia and Roll to Bank's show a couple of weeks later after the remix's release, although with the added info that he'd already been informed of Noel's tentative inroads over the previous couple of weeks. He gave us carte blanche to do what the fuck we want. His only mandate was to make it worthy enough to fit into one of our psychedelic bubble mixes. A sitar chord, some filtered percussive samples, God, Revolution, Freedom. So begins the 22-minute remix. Gaz told Rod the Bank that they had created 5 versions and weren't sure which one would be the one they delivered, before deciding that if Noel really wanted something Monstrous bubble-worthy, he'd get a whole Monstrous psychedelic bubble mix himself with all 5 tracks put together. In many ways it really feels like an Amorphous Androgynous multi-part single in itself, and that's how I've always approached it. The first part is very much the original, effectively an Amorphous style reworking of Falling Down, the standard later era Oasis jangle replaced by sitars, flutes, harmonicas and electronics, but very much the same song with the same structure. Noel's vocals and acoustic guitar are at the front of the track. It closes by going into more warped territory, including a breakdown full of field recordings, chopped up and reversed vocals and a new groovy bass line. Layers of harmonica form a wonderfully unusual texture before the drums kick in for the final chorus and outro. It would have been a marvellous 7-minute remix on its own merits, but then huge churning synth sounds come in and it's on to the second part, an instrumental version with synth solos and a lot of playing with effects. 3 minutes later the whole thing breaks down to near silence, and Brian's daughter Bo speaks some lyrics before a piano line and filtered vocals come in. When these strings arrive, it's clear that part 3 is the FSOL section of the mix, tying in beautifully with the modern classical approach of FSOL material at the time. It's a really gorgeous piece. I only wish it went on for much longer. After a brief environment of insect chirps and flutes, the track builds up again for part 4, only with Alicia Sufit singing. This is her first appearance on an Amorphous studio track, having been a touring member for a couple of years prior. Amusingly, this was strongly considered to be part 1 of the remix, before the band imagined Liam hearing it for the first time. Within a minute they decided to swap the 2 parts over. Having gone far enough out to enter FSOL territory, the suite works its way right back to the source, with part 5 effectively being a largely instrumental reprise of the first part, first led by a sitar melody with Noel's vocals in the background. The remix eventually closes with strings and those rook calls heard so frequently on Amorphous records and mixes. The band working with Oasis and Noel has been a controversial move, with many believing Brian and Gaz are in several leagues above the Gallaghers. I'm a bit of a lapsed Oasis fan, having owned all their albums at some point and having a nostalgic fondness for some of their stuff. I'm happy to admit that most of their later albums are mediocre and the Gallaghers are both turds in their own special ways, which is all a preamble for saying that this is one of my all-time favourite Amorphous Androgynous tracks. Noel could still knock out the occasional killer at this point, and Falling Down is by far my favourite of the band's later era, a heavily late 60s psych pop inspired piece in its own right, complete with Tomorrow Never Knows drums, making it the perfect track for the Amorphous treatment. Thankfully Liam is nowhere near it, as I can't imagine his vocals suiting the Monstrous bubble sound at all. Throwing the fact that this 60s psych pop sound is my favourite type of Amorphous material, and the FSOL part in the middle being especially great, it just ticks all the boxes for me. The Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble remix had arrived as a concept, and this first attempt gained the band a huge amount of press and public attention. There are some naysayers, but it seems to have become a bit of an iconic remix, with Oasis, Amorphous and many FSOL fans seeming to love it. It was brought up in interviews many times, with the Independent somehow missing Gaz's jokes that Noel had previously acted as a roadie for them, writing it up seriously. I generally like the Independent more than most other mainstream news sources, but that was really hilarious. The remix was released in the UK as a standalone Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble Exploding in Your Mind 12-inch, subtitled a 20-minute cosmic oozescape psychedelicized by the Amorphous Androgynous, with the tracklist stating parts 1 to 5, furthering the idea that it's kind of an FSOL Amorphous style multi-part single in itself. Promotional editions, as well as the Japanese CD release, include the track as a single 22-minute piece. FSOL are still listed as producers at this point, while Dan Pemberton is the only returning musician, with Jonathan Mayer and Alicia Sufit familiar from the live lineup but making their first studio contributions here. All other musicians are new to Amorphous, the early noughties era of the band long dead. The Amorphous Androgynous, Kiev, 11th of April 2009. And finally, Amorphous Androgynous will be playing in Kiev in the Ukraine on Saturday, April 11th. A brief note from the band in March 2009, 2 weeks before the show. We know almost nothing about it other than it was at Gogol Fest and, according to a YouTube video, The Emptiness of Nothingness and The Lovers were played. Fairly standard stuff. The lineup looks very similar to that of the 2008 shows, surprisingly. A brief post-gig interview is also on YouTube, although very little of real interest is said. It closes with some brief footage of the show, bizarrely overlaid with the FSOL track Latronic 1. The Future Sound of London, Existenz Athens, 23rd of May 2009. The second show in the 2009 FSOL World Tour, this ISDN transmission to the El Nico Softball Stadium in Athens has gone down as a particularly memorable moment in this era of the band. Media, Electronic and Zen Garden were the support acts performing on stage. It's weird to think of FSOL having a support band. The stage itself featured 3 large screens, with 2 further large screens shaped as Brian and Gaz's heads, designed by Diane Harris. These gave the show its name, In Two Minds.
I remember you. 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 You remember us. 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 I can see you. See you. See you. See you. See you. See you. See you.
All Gaz spiel from the start of the show, and then into We Have Explosive Part 4. Footage from YouTube suggests a set list including Hurt Killing or We Have Explosive Part 4, Everyone in the World is Doing Something Without Me, My Kingdom, Brujo, Yage, Mouth Muse, Life Forms, Welcome, Cascade Part 1 and 2 incorporating What Falls Away Is Always, Room 208, Vertical Pig, We Have Explosive, Papua New Guinea and Tingler. This is the first known live outing of the album arrangement of Yage. My Kingdom appears in its 96-97 tour live arrangement with extra layers of vocals over the end. The YouTube clips are the only footage we've heard of the new update to Life Forms. The track with Gaz singing, Welcome, is very FSOL sounding but a unique spin on the sound and should really be released one of these days. We Have Explosive and Papua New Guinea are in their usual live double header. Both tracks are pretty heavily reworked from the usual studio sounds, Explosive particularly. There's a video of the full track on YouTube. Brujo and Yage are linked by Riz Maslin's Jane Jane vocal. Tingler as an encore is a bonkers moment that must have come totally out of the blue. The incorporation of the Berlin School section of Environments Part 1, later releases What Falls Away As Always into Cascade, is inspired. Hurt Killing or We Have Explosive Part 4 goes off into some mad glitches and pounding beats in the middle, foreshadowing the 2021 re-recording. Papua New Guinea has additional pads. All in all, it's clear that these aren't just straight run-throughs of the tracks as one might expect from some of the 90s radio transmissions. This is a proper gig with some wildly different versions of the tracks. The on-stage video footage includes a lot of 90s material, but also newer shots from Brian, Diane Harris and Tom Bell, as well as early noughties Amorphous stock. Gaz and Brian seem to be on one screen or other at most of the time. Various other definitions of what FSOL could mean are also shown, with Gaz repeating FSOL forever sending our love at the end of the show. Others include fully signifying other languages, friends, sages or lovers, far out son of lung, fractional segment of light, fast sequence of liquidity, frequent seclusion or loneliness, far-sighted outer light, forward shift over meditation, found somewhere or lost, fractionally solid oily liquid, feeling something or lapsing, feeling serenity or longing, free sex or love, free speech oppressive lies, fuck shit or laugh, final snapshot of life, fake speech offers learning, futuristic spark of lucidity, flowing shapes of lucidity and flowering shades of luminance. A DVD of the whole 90-minute set was planned for release under the name In Two Minds. Several potential DVD extras were added to YouTube in 2009. Apparently the footage has been lost, which is frustrating to say the least. I'm hoping we at least get a 2CD version of the show at some point, because I would love to hear all these live interpretations in high quality. Comments on the FSOL board and YouTube are pretty much overwhelmingly positive, with people calling it a life-changing experience. It seems increasingly unlikely over time that this sort of show will ever happen again, so it would be lovely to at least share in the experience, if only through an audio release. A clip of Vertical Pig on 2012, The Fears and Fantasies of the Unconscious Mind, is the only official release of any of the material to date. The Amorphous Androgynous Bangers and Mash Festival, 30th of May 2009. Announced in April, an Amorphous live set at the Bangerz and Mash Festival in Stockholm. That's the extent of the knowledge. No lineups, no footage, no reviews, zilch. Sometimes it's kind of embarrassing to be doing a fan production of this band. Most fan sites will have photographs, videos, set lists, details, reviews, lineups, everything. Here we have the name of the festival, the date, sometimes the place it was performed. That's it. Why was Gaz so desperate for no fans to actually turn up to his performances? Anyway, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. Do let me know your thoughts on these transmissions, performances and so on, if you're even aware of them. If this has introduced you to some new stuff, great. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it coming into it the first time. Do leave me a comment below. I love reading your comments. I love replying to them. There are also like, subscribe, share buttons. You know the drill by now. They really help my channel. And I will be back next week with a bunch more transmissions and performances from 2009. I hope you'll join me then.